Ctrl+Alt+Comply, where regulation meets reality and risk becomes actionable. I am your host, Imran Khan, cybersecurity and compliance expert. Today, we will deep dive into Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, a landmark regulation that changed and reshaped corporate accountability forever. Today, we will explore its origins, who must comply, the challenges of adherence, and how a post-COVID world has added new layers of complexity. Let's get started. 2000s. America was rocked by massive financial scandals involving predominantly three companies: Enron, MCI WorldCom, and Tyco Foods, where executives manipulated financial statements, resulting in billions of dollars in losses. Public trust in the market evaporated. In response, the Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, named after its sponsors, Senator Paul Sarbanes and Representative Michael Oxley. The Act introduced new provisions for corporate accountability and bolstered existing principles. Now, for example, one, it mandated that the CEO and/or CFO must personally certify financial reports. Secondly, it mandated that internal controls over financial reporting be audited. Third, it introduced and bolstered existing whistleblower protections. Fourth, it mandated auditor independence. Fifth, PCAOB, Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, was established to oversee audit firms. Because remember, at the heart of the Enron scandal, which was a boat-rocking scandal, was a well-known accounting giant, Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen was a unique firm. It set the stage for what we know as the business models for the Big Four accounting firms. The Big Four accounting firms and that we know of are Deloitte & Touche, PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, KPMG, and Ernst & Young, EY. All of these firms have their accounting practices by industry. Then they also have consulting wings. Well, for Deloitte, it could be Deloitte Advisory, Deloitte Consulting, similar structure for PwC. Arthur Andersen's consulting wing was Andersen Consulting. The two companies, biggest client was Enron. When Enron paid bonuses, they paid big. Enron's signature car for among its employees was a Porsche. The more souped up a Porsche was, the bigger it implied that the driver had the bigger bonus and a bigger title. Enron employees, by and large, in the early 2000s, got $100 haircuts. So that goes to tell you what was Enron's reputation and prowess. Sarbanes-Oxley, or SOX, primarily applies to companies that are traded on any of the US stock exchanges. Additionally, it does apply to branches of foreign firms that are listed on the US stock exchange. Now, if companies are eyeing IPOs, initial public offerings, that is, they are in the process of getting listed onto one of the stock exchanges in the US, they should and must adopt SOX-like controls. Interestingly, smaller public companies got phased implementation deadlines. Now that's a debate that continues even to this day. SOX compliance is very complex and expensive. I remember reading a survey about a year or maybe even 8 months ago that said that SOX compliance can cost large firms upwards of $1 million. And this is because of 3 or 4 major challenges. One is documentation. SOX is documentation heavy. It is very tedious and a Herculean challenge to map all financial processes and document them. Ingress, egress, upstream, downstream, and midstream. It's a nightmare. A bigger nightmare is associated with the IT controls, which have to be documented and tested. And the current landscape that we have out there, the cyber threat landscape, doesn't add any level of ease to any of us. Thirdly, as I said, it is costly, expensive, and complex. The teams themselves, all teams across the board, will be drowned in a lot of documentation, evidence collection, testing, and then remediation to start the cycle all over again. The biggest challenge is with companies that have decentralized systems. That's because SOX demands and mandates consistency. SOX compliance is not a story of checking the boxes and filling out paperwork. It's a maze of processes, especially when it comes to IT systems. Now keep in mind that when SOX came out, we did not have, let's say, the NIST CSF or NIST 800-53 frameworks. We had a new kind of a framework called ITGC, Information Technology General Controls, which for a very long time were the backbone of Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. Now, ITGC, when you think of ITGC, you would think of things like user access controls, change management, system operations, backup and data integrity. In essence, these controls ensured that the financial data in the big systems like the ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems like PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, SAP, databases, and others, they were kept secure and adhered to the integrity requirements. Now, in my early days as an auditor, I would say one of the most memorable events in ITGC was a trend. I would say it was based on a trend also, that many companies failed their ITGC audits because, one, let's say they couldn't just get their user access management right, or their backup recovery controls utterly sucked. Now, in my earliest experience, and this is going back to about in the first 6-7 years of SOX, I remember a particular financial client where we had cited them for lack of an inventory of non-human identities. It was a very large firm. They had hundreds of non-human identities, which some of you guys might call system IDs or functional IDs or anything of that nature. What these guys did not inventory properly was which non-human IDs were there, who owned them, what they did, were they privileged, non-privileged, which application they were tied to, or what boxes, servers they were provisioned to. And these non-human IDs did a number of tasks like backup and taking backups of the servers, running batch jobs, ETL processes, or just running other normal business operations. Just automate any of the automation jobs. Those were done by those IDs. They also did not know whether the IDs were privileged or non-privileged. Were they interactive or non-interactive? This was a red flag. As a result of this audit, my leadership at that time decided to give them a material weakness citation for that. Now, one of the things I noticed during my audit days, and even now I do notice that, which is IT teams and business teams alike panic when auditors ask for evidence, especially for if it concerns the IT systems, segregation of duties, or other critical tasks. It's often a scramble for these teams to retroactively document controls. ITGC, or IT General Controls, had an inherent challenge in that they did not effectively map IT controls to business objectives. To overcome this challenge, ISACA, which is one of my favorite organizations to work with because of the whole slew of resources that they have available, such as training and development programs for IT and cyber professionals, as well as a number of industry recognized certifications such as SaaS, CISM, CGIT, etc., etc. They are also known for developing a framework acronym COBIT, Control Objective for Information and Related Technologies. The current version is COBIT 2019, which supersedes COBIT 5.0. It provides a framework for professionals to align IT controls to business events and goals, such as ensuring data integrity for financial reporting. As an example, Control APO 12 is on managed risk. It directly supports SOX 404 compliance. It gives companies a structured way to identify IT risks, such as unauthorized access, and design controls to mitigate them. A compliance program, in my opinion, without COBIT is like driving an Audi without petrol. You might be at a gas station or a petrol station with your Audi, but do you know if you're pumping in the right fuel? Which is what ITGC is. COBIT ensures that the ITGC measures are audit-proof. COVID-19 lockdown in 2020 was a massive blow to many people, many industries. In fact, after when the lockdown was eased, I recall going into New York City and found out that a lot of my favorite food carts, food trucks, were out of business. They no longer existed. At the same time, many restaurants went out of business. Remote or hybrid work became the major norm for most of people, right? Although there is a strong push by big banks such as JP Morgan Chase or even Facebook, Google, they're all pushing more employees to go back to the normal pre-COVID work lifestyle, which was almost 100% in office, if not 4 days in office out of 5. But COVID changed that. Now, besides all of this, COVID also blew a massive hole in the traditional ITGCs. Because now, all those financial systems, and let's just talk about financial services industry for a second, all those financial systems that could not be accessed remotely. Now, as an example, traders across the banks, across the industry, financial services industry, were not able to access the trading application or execute any trades via a VPN remote connection. During the lockdown, we had that challenge. What did companies do? So some of them got exceptions. Traders went in. They stood 6-12 feet apart. Whatever. Some of them wore double, triple masks just to avoid contamination or getting in contact with COVID. But then it wasn't a sustainable model. So many trading companies slowly started easing those restrictions and allowed traders to access those platforms remotely. With this, of course, hello and welcome VPN. VPN became more widely adopted. I mean, it was there before. It's been around for decades. I remember when I first started out in the industry, I set up a small VPN tunnel to a server using an IPsec tunnel. Great, it worked out perfectly fine back then. But then the scalable VPN with 100% workforce working remote, that was unheard of. So now what it means is auditors are increasingly demanding about remote access controls, and they expect them to be airtight. Also remember that besides COVID, there is a new trend going on where a lot of companies are moving into the cloud. Some are adopting public cloud infrastructure for their use. Others have public-private cloud hybrid installations, and anything in between. SaaS, of course, is very common, where somebody else hosts your application for you and you just consume it. The data resides with the hosting company. The host is responsible to ensure that the patches are rolled out properly, that the data does not commingle, your data does not commingle with other tenants' data, and etc. There's so many other security considerations and other considerations that come into play. But that becomes a problem because a lot of people do not understand, or organizations do not understand, the shared services model. This is a perfect case for implementing COBIT. Now in COBIT, one of the controls, DSS 05, talks about managed security services, and it's a good control to implement and overcome this challenge that organizations have with a shared services model. Because remember, and this is according to another study I read, that 68% of the SOX deficiencies can be tied to cloud-based systems. When SOX came out, audit was a very traditional business. When I say traditional, very traditional. At that time, I would say, if we look at 3 professions, or maybe 4, that were very traditional were: 1, doctors; 2, lawyers; 3, federal and state governments; 4, audit. Now when I said traditional, yes, you should think of, and rightfully think of, things like signed documents, the regular John Hancock; segregated office networks. Audit had its own VLAN. Physical space segregation. So I remember when I first encountered SOX auditors, 2 of the big 4s in the past, I was like, wow, I was amazed. I was like, these guys have their own space. Nobody can go in, nobody can come out. It's just like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out. So that was a kind of environment audit or SOX auditors operated in. Sadly, COVID changed that. in the lockdown of 2020, if I'm right, COVID-19. So yeah, 2020 lockdown changed everything. Out of necessity, not by choice, we all went digital. No longer could auditors just pop in on the floor and say, "Hello, surprise, we're here." And my joke was, when I was in audit, that when I stepped on the floor, on the production floors or the IT floors, people would duck under their desks. So now, with everything remote, and in the initial days of the lockdown, kids and everybody went remote. The internet took a big hit. The broadband services were running at full capacity, I would say. Some companies prohibited screen share sessions. They also prohibited video calls. They said, okay, use voice but no videos. Now with the lockdown and the new way of working introduced new challenges, especially for auditors. With a dispersed and disjointed, disconnected workforce, there were many control deficiencies that we encountered, right? As the industry as a whole. For example, VPNs, right? Some VPNs were overloaded, so they had to do some load shedding. Maybe one class of workers or one types of workers could work at certain shifts. It became like a factory work environment, shift work. Additionally, there were new weaknesses in VPNs that were being discovered. Then, with the way of working, when everybody was remote, everybody was taking confidential calls from work calls at home, or maybe they were sitting in a common area in some places, maybe possible, right? There was a chance of information leakage. For example, those people who live in flats or apartments, especially the ones in the US, the walls are paper thin. You could potentially hear the person next door or the one above you or below you talking. So there was that inadvertent disclosure of confidential information. Or sometimes just curious family members or friends might just eavesdrop on the conversations. Another inadvertent eavesdrop came from our smart home devices, which most of them are in listen mode all the time, unless you specifically put them on mute or you put them on a schedule. So that was another challenge. Now, with all of this, it made the auditors' jobs a lot harder because they were used to in-person inspections. And now they had to rely on the goodwill and the good nature of people to show them the right evidence via screen share. Of course, that can always be a problem for a doubtful auditor. Now, here's an example of one of the issues I spoke to somebody about during one of the events. He said that at a major company, the accounting department's
personnel, one of the personnel rather, ended up losing a critical spreadsheet because his or her kid deleted the file just out of curiosity from the person's shared drive. Now, had it been the pre-COVID, lockdown days, this may not have happened, but in this case it did happen because of this person, or rather the rest of us, working remotely with juggling kids and families while working and doing our jobs. In a way, COVID-19 lockdown was a game changer for those industries and professions that were long resistant to adopting a digital lifestyle. In the wake of this lockdown, or rather the global lockdown, they found themselves scrambling to adopt and implement technologies at a very rapid pace without giving forethought to what were the consequences. Now, for some of those industries and professions, the SOX controls were not updated at the speed of digitization. Very suddenly, companies' uber secret confidential information was now residing on third-party servers. Auditors demanded proof that the information stored on those servers was secure, met its integrity requirements, and was available when needed. At the same time, in post-lockdown, the blurry lines between AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, ML, were becoming clearer. The market was ripe for AI adoption, and it was trending positively. This introduced new concerns. Who's monitoring the bots and AI and the decisions that these AI enabled tools made? What if they made a mistake or malfunctioned? And this is where COBIT Framework comes in handy. APO 11, Manage Risk, comes to aid to govern these tools. Now, I remember post the lockdown, when the lockdown restrictions were eased and we were allowed to commingle, and industry events were became more common in person rather than virtually. I came across a person who said that in that rush to adopt AI-enabled tools, his company adopted this automated invoice payment tool. However, the bot or AI tool could not detect fraudulent charges and payments. As a result, they lost a lot of money, but when they realized the errors and omissions. They had to rebuild their controls around automation. In a way, COVID-19 lockdown was a game changer for those industries and professions that were long resistant to adopting a digital lifestyle. In the wake of this lockdown, or rather the global lockdown, they found themselves scrambling to adopt and implement technologies at a very rapid pace without giving forethought to what were the consequences. Now, for some of those industries and professions, the SOX controls were not updated at the speed of digitization. Very suddenly, companies' uber secret confidential information was now residing on third-party servers. Auditors demanded proof that the information stored on those servers was secure, met its integrity requirements, and was available when needed. At the same time, in post-lockdown, the blurry lines between AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, ML, were becoming clear. Audit is a very engaging, high pressure and high stakes profession. It is not uncommon to see auditors spend mega hours during audit season, that is. As an independent consultant in audit back then, I actually enjoyed billing those mega hours because mega hours meant mega money. That's how the graph went. But then the enough becomes unbearing. It becomes unbearable. When I left my high stakes audit career to go into enterprise risk management, I suddenly found myself with a lot of time to do other things. For example, preparing for another certification, and now I do things like this also in my spare time. Education services. The other aspect of the COVID-19 lockdown was a term that was coined by some economists. It was called the Great Resignation. I'm sure a lot of you might have seen it, experienced it, or you were part of it. This led to dramatic and massive talent shortages across the board, and audit was no exceptions. This forced audit to go hybrid, meaning not like remote work and 5-day remote. 3 days remote, 2 days on site, or vice versa. Instead, audit approach changed. They now did some inspections over a virtual call while leaving critical controls inspection to be an on-site visit. According to another study by one of the giant audit firms, I believe they said something like 73% of audits now follow a hybrid approach, which is about 10 to 12% more than the pre-COVID days. Audit is a very engaging, high-pressure and high-stakes profession. It is not uncommon to see auditors spend mega hours during audit season, that is. As an independent consultant in audit back then, I actually enjoyed billing those mega hours because mega hours meant mega money. That's how the graph went. But then the enough becomes unbearing. It becomes unbearable. When I left my high stakes audit career to go into enterprise risk management, suddenly found myself with a lot of time to do other things. For example, preparing for another certification, and now I do things like this also in my spare time, education services. The other aspect of the COVID-19 lockdown was a term that was coined by some economists. It was called the Great Resignation. I'm sure a lot of you might have seen it, experienced it, or you were part of it. This led to dramatic and massive talent shortages across the board, and audit was no exceptions. This forced